underground gangs and the unexpected stories behind them. From the streets to the shadows. The birth of underground networks. Long before the world became aware of sprawling, transnational gangs, organized crime operated quietly in the shadows of urban and rural landscapes alike. The roots of modern gangs can be traced to the early 20th century, where social, economic, and political pressures created fertile ground for clandestine networks. In New York City, the 1920s saw the rise of the Italian Mafia, or Cosa Nostra, which emerged from waves of Italian immigrants fleeing poverty and persecution. According to FBI historical files, these groups were initially community-based organizations, offering protection and social services in neighborhoods neglected by law enforcement or municipal authorities. Their influence extended into labor unions, local politics, and illicit trades, most notably bootlegging during Prohibition. The Mafia's strict hierarchical structure, code of silence, known as omerta, and rituals of initiation created a template for loyalty, discipline, and authority that would echo in gangs across the world. Simultaneously, on the opposite side of the globe, Japan saw the consolidation of Yakuza syndicates, some of which can trace their origins back to 17th-century merchants and gamblers. In the modern era, the Yakuza formalized into organized crime families that controlled gambling, construction, and the entertainment industry. Law enforcement reports from the Japanese National Police Agency confirm that Yakuza groups adopted a mixture of cultural codes, including tattooing and ceremonial obligations, to reinforce hierarchy and loyalty. Their integration into local politics and business, often operating in plain sight, exemplifies a model of criminal enterprise that blends coercion with legitimacy, a characteristic that would later inspire similar structures in other countries. In Latin America, the seeds of modern cartels took hold in the mid-20th century. Countries like Colombia and Mexico experienced a confluence of poverty, weak state enforcement, and lucrative agricultural markets for coca and opium. According to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, cartels such as the Medellin and Cali groups in Colombia initially arose as local networks facilitating the transport of cocaine. Over time, these operations expanded vertically and horizontally, controlling production, distribution, and enforcement. The Mexican cartels followed a similar path, consolidating power over drug trafficking corridors, often leveraging bribes and intimidation to co-opt local officials and law enforcement officers. In both contexts, gangs filled a vacuum left by under-resourced governments, effectively operating as shadow authorities within their regions. Across these continents, the motivations for gang formation were remarkably similar. Economic hardship was often the catalyst. In neighborhoods where jobs were scarce, formal education limited, and law enforcement unreliable, young men, and in some cases women, turned to criminal networks to secure income, protection, and status. Sociological studies from the University of Chicago and John Jay College of Criminal Justice suggest that early gang involvement also served as a form of community defense. Residents in marginalized neighborhoods sometimes welcomed organized gangs because they offered security against random violence or predatory actors. The result was a paradoxical duality. Gangs were both predators and protectors, enforcing their own rules while shielding local communities from external threats. Corruption played a critical role in amplifying gang influence. In the United States, municipal police departments were frequently infiltrated or coerced by local crime families. Court documents from Tammany Hall-era New York illustrate how political patronage allowed the mafia to manipulate elections, adjudicate disputes, and extend their reach into legitimate businesses. In Mexico, investigative reports reveal that local law enforcement often operated as enforcers for cartels, a practice that continues in certain regions today. In Japan, corporate entities occasionally partnered with Yakuza syndicates for profit, despite public denials. Across these cases, a common pattern emerges. Gangs thrived when the formal mechanisms of law were either weak, compromised, or indifferent to the welfare of their communities. The organizational principles developed during these formative years set the stage for the evolution of global network. Strict codes of conduct, hierarchical structures, and territorial control allowed gangs to grow from local crews into disciplined organizations capable of managing complex operations. Initiation rituals, whether the blood oaths of the Mafia, tattoo markings of the Yakuza, or the clandestine inductions of Latin American cartels, reinforced loyalty while deterring betrayal. Sociologists often describe these networks as shadow governments, a term that underscores their dual role in providing both governance and coercion in areas neglected or abandoned by formal authorities. One notable example comes from Chicago in the 1920s, where Italian-American gangs dominated both the liquor trade and the labor unions of the meatpacking industry. According to the Chicago Crime Commission, these organizations maintained detailed ledgers, employed enforcers, and controlled entire blocks of the city through fear and negotiation. Similarly, in Japan, Yakuza families regulated entire districts in cities like Tokyo and Osaka, managing gambling parlors, construction contracts, and local events. In Latin America, cartels established quasi-governmental functions, collecting taxes from local businesses, mediating disputes between rival groups, and controlling local security forces. In all cases, the combination of economic opportunity, social protection, and intimidation provided the blueprint for what we now recognize as sophisticated underground networks. Importantly, these early networks were not purely criminal in the contemporary sense. They often performed functions that governments failed to provide: security, dispute resolution, and even charitable acts within their communities. The Mafia in Sicily, for instance, would intervene in property disputes, while Colombian cartels funded local infrastructure projects in remote villages. These acts were strategic, designed to cement loyalty and legitimacy among local populations. Yet they also illustrate a crucial reality. Gangs operated on a dual axis, balancing coercion with community investment, survival with ambition. This duality made them resilient, adaptable, and often invisible to the broader society, laying the groundwork for the international reach of criminal networks that would emerge later in the century. The impact of media and law enforcement narratives further shaped these networks. In the U.S., sensationalized reporting on Prohibition-era gang violence gave public notoriety to figures like Al Capone, while law enforcement crackdowns forced groups to evolve operationally. Similarly, Japanese and Latin American gangs adjusted to increased policing and international scrutiny by diversifying their revenue streams and creating insulated hierarchies. According to reports from Interpol and the United Nations, these adaptations allowed criminal organizations to survive across decades, often outlasting political regimes, economic downturns, and law enforcement initiatives. By the mid-20th century, underground networks had evolved into highly structured entities capable of sustaining prolonged operations. Their influence extended beyond criminal activity. They shaped economies, infiltrated governments, and imposed social order where states failed. According to FBI historical archives and declassified law enforcement documents, the Mafia, Yakuza, and Latin American cartels had established models for discipline, territorial control, and cross-border operations that continue to inform gang strategy today. They created invisible empires, shadow governments that leveraged fear, loyalty, and secrecy to consolidate power. The story of underground gangs is, therefore, inseparable from the history of human inequality, state failure, and the struggle for survival. Poverty, social exclusion, and corruption created the conditions for these networks to flourish. Over time, what began as small, localized crews transformed into disciplined organizations with hierarchies, rituals, and methods designed to endure. They became a paradoxical force, feared by society, yet integral to the communities that nurtured them. As the 20th century progressed, these networks laid the foundation for the global underground economy, providing a template for modern gangs that now operate across continents, utilize technology for coordination, and diversify into legal and illegal ventures. Understanding the birth of these organizations, the social conditions, the economic drivers, and the methods of control is crucial to grasping the contemporary landscape of organized crime. From the back alleys of New York to the favelas of Rio, from Tokyo's gambling districts to Mexico's drug corridors, the legacy of these early networks endures. The streets gave rise to shadows, and the shadows gave rise to power systems that remain largely invisible today. Yet, while these networks are often romanticized in popular culture, the reality for those caught inside them, members, families, and communities, is stark. Loyalty comes with risk, survival depends on obedience, and the price of defiance can be life itself. Understanding the origins of these underground empires is the first step in unraveling how gangs transformed from local crews to the global powerhouses that influence economies, politics, and security across continents. Prison incubators, gangs behind bars. Prisons are often thought of as instruments of punishment and isolation, places where criminals are removed from society. Yet, in reality, correctional facilities have historically acted as crucibles for organized crime, incubating networks that reach far beyond the walls. While confinement is meant to suppress violence, in many of the world's most notorious facilities, it has paradoxically strengthened gang hierarchies, sharpened discipline, and extended influence to the street. In the United States, facilities like Pelican Bay State Prison in California, ADX Florence in Colorado, and Folsom State Prison have become infamous not merely for their security measures, but for the sophisticated criminal organizations that thrive within. Court filings, investigative journalism, and human rights reports indicate that gangs like Nuestra Familia, the Aryan Brotherhood, and the Mexican Mafia operate with remarkable structure inside these institutions. What begins as survival, protection against rival inmates, evolves into sophisticated command networks that coordinate criminal activities outside prison walls. Take Pelican Bay, for example. Located in Crescent City, California, Pelican Bay was designed to house the state's most violent and gang-affiliated inmates, many serving life sentences. According to the landmark Madrid v. Gomez, 1995 court case, which challenged the conditions of solitary confinement, inmates were segregated into security housing units, SHU, to curb violence and gang coordination. Ironically, these isolation units became fertile ground for organized control. Leaders of gangs like Nuestra Familia discovered ways to communicate through coded letters, subtle gestures, and contraband cell phones. Investigations later confirmed that even while confined, leaders issued orders for street-level enforcement, orchestrated drug trafficking, and dictated the movements of affiliate members. The SHU, intended to suppress influence, instead became a strategic nerve center. Similarly, ADX Florence, the federal Supermax in Colorado, designed for maximum security inmates, illustrates the paradoxical role of prisons in cultivating organizational skill. While the prison is famous for extreme isolation, prisoners spend up to 23 hours per day in concrete cells. The inmates who survive long-term confinement often develop heightened discipline and tactical thinking. Federal court records and investigative reports show that incarcerated leaders of the Aryan Brotherhood, Mexican Mafia, and other gangs adapted their networks to function under extreme restrictions. Methods of communication were subtle: coded messages hidden in legal paperwork, contraband letters, and even signals passed during supervised recreation. These methods allowed gangs to maintain influence over operations on the outside, proving that physical isolation does not necessarily break organizational control. Folsom State Prison, one of California's oldest correctional facilities, offers another glimpse into the development of inmate-run network. According to the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, Folsom houses multiple security levels, including units dedicated to gang-affiliated inmates. Investigations have revealed that street crews sent members into the facility specifically to be educated by experienced gang leaders. Inside, new recruits were taught rules, hierarchies, and methods of communication that would be deployed once they returned to the street. Gang leadership in prison functioned like a corporate structure, complete with ranks, enforcement divisions, and disciplinary procedures. Violations of the rules, whether defiance, betrayal, or failure to pay taxes to the gang, could result in beatings, isolation, or loss of privileges. The Mexican Mafia, also known as LAIM, provides a detailed example of how incarceration strengthened gang operations. Formed in the 1950s in Southern California prisons, LAIM was initially a protective coalition for Mexican-American inmates against rival gangs. Over decades, the organization evolved into a disciplined criminal enterprise, issuing orders that extended far beyond prison walls. According to FBI reports and court documents, incarcerated leaders could dictate who could work in street-level drug markets, settle disputes between rival gangs, and even sanction hits against non-compliant affiliates. This level of coordination, made possible by the concentration of experienced leaders in prison, allowed LAIM to become one of the most feared and structured gangs in the United States. Parallel to LAIM, Nuestra Familia emerged in Northern California prisons as a counterforce to Mexican Mafia dominance. Comprised primarily of Northern California inmates, the gang established strict codes of conduct and loyalty, formal initiation processes, and severe penalties for betrayal. Court filings and parole hearing documents confirm that leaders within the security housing units orchestrated attacks, controlled drug distribution, and monitored member behavior across multiple facilities. The concentration of leadership in prison created a clear hierarchy and command structure that mirrored military organizations. The result was a network that, while physically constrained, expanded influence exponentially through careful coordination and enforced obedience. The Aryan Brotherhood demonstrates another dimension of prison gang evolution. Formed in the 1960s in San Quentin State Prison, the Aryan Brotherhood initially served as a protective group for white inmates in racially tense environments. However, investigators and court documents reveal that the gang quickly institutionalized its operations, establishing initiation rites, codes of conduct, and enforcement mechanisms. Leaders in solitary confinement maintained control over outside operations, including drug trafficking, money laundering, and violence enforcement. Unlike other criminal organizations, the Aryan Brotherhood relied heavily on fear, reputation, and the ability to punish transgressions both inside and outside prison, creating a culture where loyalty was enforced rigorously and betrayals were met with extreme consequences. Communication has always been a critical factor in prison gang operations. Despite physical isolation, gang leaders developed methods to relay instructions without detection. According to investigative reports from the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, these methods included coded letters disguised as legal correspondence, signals in yard recreation, indirect messaging through visiting family members, and illicit use of contraband cell phones. Even routine interactions with guards could be leveraged for communication. These sophisticated methods underscore that prisons, rather than dismantling gangs, often provide concentrated leadership, training, and strategic planning that enhances outside influence. The global dimension of prison gangs cannot be understated. While the U.S. prison system has been extensively studied, similar patterns exist worldwide. In Brazil, prisons like Alcatraz and Anísio Jobim have documented cases of gang leaders operating from behind bars, issuing orders that shaped drug trafficking, territorial control, and violence both inside and outside the facilities. Investigative journalism, including reports from Folha de Sao Paulo, confirmed that during riots, imprisoned leaders directed operations from their cells, demonstrating how incarceration can serve as a hub for organized crime. In Mexico, the Mexican cartels have consistently embedded their leadership in prisons, with incarcerated members coordinating regional distribution networks and resolving conflicts with deadly precision. The evolution of gangs behind bars highlights an important paradox. Prisons, intended to neutralize criminal influence, often consolidate it. The concentration of experienced criminals, the structured hierarchy enforced through intimidation, and the ability to control resources, both illicit and legal, transform correctional facilities into incubators for organizational growth. Reports from human rights organizations, court filings, and federal investigations consistently show that incarcerated leaders wield immense power, dictating behavior inside and outside the prison environment. This phenomenon challenges the simplistic notion that isolation alone diminishes criminal network. Instead, it underscores the strategic adaptability of gangs and their capacity to exploit institutional vulnerabilities. Moreover, the psychological component cannot be ignored. For many incarcerated leaders, prison offers a controlled environment to refine tactics, enforce loyalty, and mentor the next generation of members. According to interviews with former inmates and law enforcement officials, the ability to influence operations from a restricted environment fosters both ingenuity and discipline. Inmates develop detailed knowledge of security protocols, contraband movement, and communication tactics that later translate into highly efficient, resilient networks once they re-enter society. In essence, incarceration becomes an advanced training ground for criminal strategy, a controlled environment where risk is concentrated and rewards, loyalty, respect, influence, are magnified. Prison-based gang networks also demonstrate the power of institutionalized code. Whether it is LAIM's hierarchy, Nuestra Familia's strict northern/southern division, or the Aryan Brotherhood's enforcement rituals, these codes establish predictable structures that facilitate control over complex operations. Violations are not merely personal, they threaten the integrity of the network itself. Court records detail numerous cases where inmates were punished for minor infractions, reinforcing obedience and demonstrating the consequences of defiance. The result is a disciplined organization capable of executing coordinated strategies, managing personnel, and sustaining influence far beyond the physical confines of their cells. Ultimately, the story of prison gangs is a story of resilience and adaptation. In facilities designed to suppress autonomy, gangs have discovered ways to concentrate power, enforce loyalty, and extend their reach. By converting confinement into opportunity, leaders have created networks that survive decades, influence communities, and intersect with organized crime on a global scale. From Pelican Bay to ADX Florence, from Folsom to prisons in Brazil and Mexico, the pattern is consistent. Isolation does not guarantee control, and incarceration often consolidates the very structures authorities aim to dismantle. Understanding prison as an incubator of gang power reframes our perception of organized crime. It is not merely a social problem outside the walls, it is a dynamic ecosystem inside, where hierarchy, strategy, and loyalty converge to create sophisticated, disciplined networks. These networks adapt, survive, and expand, illustrating a central truth. The prison system, despite its intent to punish, often strengthens the organizations it seeks to suppress. And for law enforcement, policymakers, and communities, grappling with the implications of this paradox remains one of the most complex challenges in modern criminal justice. The global web, gangs without borders. By the late 20th century, the landscape of organized crime had evolved far beyond local territories and neighborhood hierarchies. What began as city streets, rural towns, and individual prisons had transformed into sprawling, transnational networks. modern gangs operate across borders, often invisible to authorities, leveraging technology, international trade routes, and human networks to maintain influence on a global scale. They are no longer merely groups of men with guns. They are intricate systems capable of moving people, money, and information across continents with remarkable efficiency. One of the most prominent examples of this global expansion is MS-13, or Mara Salvatrucha, which originated in Los Angeles in the 1980s. Comprised primarily of Salvadoran immigrants, the gang initially formed to protect members from rival Latino gangs in Los Angeles neighborhood. According to the Federal Bureau of Investigation (FBI) and U.S. Department of Justice reports, MS-13 quickly evolved into a sophisticated organization with a hierarchy that included leaders in the United States, Central America, and even Canada. By the 1990s, deportation policies unintentionally facilitated the gang's expansion. Convicted members sent back to El Salvador and Honduras helped establish local cells, embedding the gang's structure deep within their home countries. Today, MS-13 is considered a transnational criminal organization, coordinating violent enforcement, human trafficking, extortion, and narcotics distribution across multiple borders. Court filings from U.S. federal cases demonstrate how leadership in one country could issue directives affecting street operations thousands of miles away, highlighting the organization's global coordination capabilities. In Europe, the Italian Ndrangheta demonstrates a similar trajectory. Once a relatively localized criminal family in Calabria, southern Italy, the Ndrangheta leveraged its family-based networks to expand internationally. According to Interpol and Italian law enforcement reports, the organization controls a substantial portion of Europe's cocaine importation, often sourcing product from South American cartels and distributing it across multiple European nations. Investigations reveal a decentralized yet highly disciplined structure, where familial loyalty, strict codes of conduct, and secrecy facilitate cross-border operations. In Germany, Switzerland, the Netherlands, and even Australia, Ndrangheta cells manage logistics, laundering, and street-level enforcement while maintaining communication with the parent organization in Italy. The organization exemplifies the principle that transnational gangs rely on both trust and structure, minimizing exposure while maximizing reach. Technology has further transformed the global reach of gangs. According to Interpol and the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, modern criminal organizations use encrypted messaging apps, social media, and darknet platforms to coordinate operations. In Central America, law enforcement has documented MS-13 leaders using smartphones, encrypted chat applications, and coded messages on social media to direct activity, issue threats, and recruit members. Similarly, European organized crime groups employ virtual private networks, VPNs, cryptocurrency, and anonymous online accounts to launder money, evade detection, and communicate across borders. Even in regions where physical travel is limited, digital networks allow gangs to maintain operational control, manage logistics, and oversee illicit revenue streams. Human trafficking and forced labor remain critical components of transnational operations. Investigations by the U.S. Department of State and UNOD confirm that gangs in Latin America, Africa, and Asia coordinate the movement of people for sexual exploitation, drug transportation, and labor. MS-13, for example, has been implicated in smuggling operations that move young men and women between Central America and the United States, often under threats of violence to ensure compliance. Similarly, Nigerian criminal networks exploit labor migration routes to facilitate human trafficking into Europe. In each case, transnational gangs leverage migration vulnerabilities to maintain a labor force, often using coercion, intimidation, or economic dependency as leverage. Drug trafficking continues to be a primary driver of cross-border criminal coordination. Colombian and Mexican cartels, as documented by the Drug Enforcement Administration (DEA), maintain intricate supply chains spanning cultivation, production, transportation, and distribution. In many cases, gangs in the United States act as street-level enforcers, while leaders embedded in Latin America orchestrate shipments and enforce territorial control. The Ndrangheta, working with South American cartels, ensures cocaine is transported from the Andean region to Europe, using legitimate shipping channels, clandestine airstrips, and bribed officials to bypass detection. The level of operational sophistication demonstrates that gangs have become hybrid organizations, part street-level enforcers, part international logistics companies, and part financial institutions, capable of managing multi-million-dollar operations under constant scrutiny. The globalization of gangs also exposes vulnerabilities in national law enforcement. In the United States, MS-13 cells in Los Angeles, Houston, and New York report to leadership abroad, complicating prosecution. Joint operations between the FBI, DEA, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE), and foreign law enforcement agencies are essential, yet coordination is challenging due to differences in legal systems, resources, and priorities. Europe faces similar hurdles. The decentralization of Ndrangheta operations across countries requires multinational investigative teams, cross-jurisdictional intelligence sharing, and specialized anti-money laundering protocols. These challenges demonstrate that global criminal networks are not merely powerful, they are agile, exploiting systemic gaps in governance and law enforcement. Social media and recruitment strategies have also evolved into critical tools for global operations. Law enforcement reports indicate that gangs use encrypted messaging apps, video content, and online forums to attract new members, promote ideology, and assert dominance. In Central America, youth are recruited into MS-13 through social media platforms, often targeting vulnerable populations in poverty-stricken neighborhoods. In Europe, the Ndrangheta and Balkan gangs have been documented using online channels to identify opportunities in real estate, trade, and finance. Even Asian criminal syndicates employ messaging apps and online forums to coordinate local and regional activities. These digital tools enable organizations to operate without physical presence, maintaining invisibility while projecting influence across continents. Financial operations are equally critical. According to DEA and Interpol reports, gangs leverage both traditional banking and digital finance to launder proceeds from drugs, human trafficking, and cybercrime. Cryptocurrency exchanges, shell companies, and offshore accounts are often employed to conceal transactions. For example, the Ndrangheta has integrated real estate purchases, high-value commodities, and cryptocurrency transactions into its laundering methods, converting illicit revenue into legitimate assets with minimal exposure. In the Americas, MS-13 and Latin American cartels exploit remittance services, small businesses, and informal banking networks to transfer funds internationally. These financial strategies enable operational continuity even under legal and law enforcement pressure. Finally, it is important to note that the globalization of gangs is not solely about crime, it is also about influence. Leaders embedded in prisons, controlling street networks, and coordinating international operations have created social, economic, and political leverage. Investigative reports indicate that in several regions, gangs have infiltrated local governments, law enforcement, and business sectors. By controlling territory, resources, and information, they shape communities according to their own rules, often creating environments where state authority is undermined. The result is a global web of influence that extends far beyond traditional definitions of organized crime. In summary, gangs have evolved from localized crews to sophisticated transnational organizations with a capacity to operate invisibly yet powerfully. Their strategies combine historical models of loyalty and hierarchy with modern technology, global trade, and financial acumen. From MS-13's cross-border operations to the Ndrangheta's international cocaine empire, gangs today are global actors, blending violence, economic leverage, and strategic planning to maintain control. Their ability to operate across borders demonstrates that organized crime is no longer constrained by geography. It is a global enterprise, adaptive, resilient, and increasingly difficult to detect. The shadow world of gangs without borders is complex and multifaceted, spanning continents, exploiting technology, and leveraging human networks. It is a world where incarceration can strengthen leadership, social media facilitates recruitment, and digital finance enables invisible empire building. Understanding this global web is crucial to confronting organized crime in the 21st century. As law enforcement and governments adapt, so too do these underground networks, demonstrating a relentless capacity for survival and influence that transcends borders, cultures, and legal systems. Hidden economies, drugs, data, and dark money. As gangs expanded globally, their operations evolved beyond traditional street-level crime. Modern organized crime is no longer confined to drugs, extortion, or violence. It has diversified into hidden economies, exploiting technology, financial systems, and emerging markets to generate revenue with remarkable sophistication. Today, criminal organizations operate like multinational corporations. They have hierarchies, divisions of labor, and strategic investment portfolios. They trade in drugs, human trafficking, identity theft, cybercrime, and cryptocurrency laundering, blending traditional criminal methods with cutting-edge technique. Drug trafficking remains the backbone of global organized crime, but the scope and scale have changed dramatically. According to the Drug Enforcement Administration (DEA) and United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime (UNODC), Colombian and Mexican cartels control multi-billion-dollar supply chains, coordinating cultivation, production, transportation, and distribution across continents. Cocaine produced in Colombia, heroin sourced from Afghanistan, and synthetic opioids manufactured in clandestine laboratories in Mexico or Asia are distributed worldwide through a combination of air, sea, and land routes. The sophistication of these networks is extraordinary. Traffickers use legitimate shipping containers, commercial flights, and even submarines to bypass law enforcement. These operations are meticulously documented in federal indictments, wiretap transcripts, and seizure reports, which reveal the scale and professionalism of modern drug enterprises. While narcotics remain central, modern gangs have recognized the potential of digital economies. Cybercrime has become a lucrative avenue, where gangs exploit vulnerabilities in banking, telecommunications, and online commerce. According to Interpol and Europol, criminal organizations engage in identity theft, phishing campaigns, ransomware attacks, and credit card fraud on a massive scale. The Russian and Eastern European Mafia, for example, have been implicated in cyber extortion campaigns targeting banks, corporations, and government. Reports indicate that ransomware alone generates billions of dollars annually, often laundered through cryptocurrencies and shell companies to obscure the origin of the funds. Human trafficking and forced labor also form part of this global hidden economy. Law enforcement investigations reveal that Latin American gangs, Southeast Asian syndicates, and African networks orchestrate the movement of vulnerable populations for sexual exploitation, domestic servitude, and illicit labor. The U.S. Department of State's Trafficking in Persons Report 2022 documents cases in which gangs use coercion, threats, and financial control to maintain compliance. Trafficked individuals are frequently moved across borders using falsified documents, clandestine shipping routes, and complex logistical arrangements designed to evade detection. These operations often intersect with drug trafficking, creating multifaceted criminal economies that rely on control of people as well as commodities. Cryptocurrency has emerged as a new frontier for illicit finance. According to Europol's Internet Organized Crime Threat Assessment (IOCTA 2021), gangs use Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other cryptocurrencies to launder funds generated from drug trafficking, ransomware attacks, and fraud. Criminals exploit the pseudonymous nature of blockchain transactions, mixing digital coins through multiple wallets and decentralized exchanges to obscure ownership. Law enforcement reports indicate that organized crime groups have invested in cryptocurrency infrastructure, using mixers and privacy coins like Monero to convert illicit profits into seemingly legitimate assets. This form of financial innovation allows criminal enterprises to operate across borders with reduced risk of interception, creating a digital underworld parallel to traditional cash-based networks. Beyond cryptocurrency, gangs increasingly manipulate legitimate financial systems to launder money. Investigations by the Financial Action Task Force (FATF) and U.S. federal prosecutors reveal that shell companies, offshore accounts, and real estate investments are standard tools. For example, the Italian Ndrangheta has been documented purchasing commercial properties, high-value commodities, and luxury goods to integrate illicit revenue into the formal economy. In Latin America, Mexican cartels and Central American gangs have exploited remittance systems, local banks, and informal money transfer networks to move funds undetected. These practices demonstrate that organized crime has embraced the global financial system as a medium for both investment and concealment, blending illicit and legitimate transactions with remarkable sophistication. Drug trafficking, cybercrime, and money laundering are often intertwined with human smuggling, arms trafficking, and contraband trade. Law enforcement reports confirm that Southeast Asian syndicates coordinate the movement of synthetic drugs alongside illegal firearms, while Latin American cartels manage cocaine routes that double as human trafficking corridors. The convergence of multiple revenue streams increases resilience and reduces dependency on a single commodity. Criminal networks leverage diversification to maintain operational continuity, even when law enforcement disrupts one sector of the enterprise. Technology also facilitates recruitment, organization, and enforcement. Gangs use encrypted messaging apps, social media, and online forums to coordinate operations, disseminate instructions, and assert dominance. According to DEA and FBI investigations, leaders can manage operations remotely, issuing directives to regional cells and overseeing financial transactions from anywhere in the world. Digital tools have transformed what was once a localized criminal enterprise into a globally distributed, real-time operation. In some cases, gangs use private chat servers and virtual private networks, VPNs, to avoid interception, demonstrating an operational awareness comparable to multinational corporations. Darknet marketplaces have further expanded the scope of hidden economies. According to Europol and the U.S. Department of Justice, criminal organizations trade illegal goods, counterfeit currency, and stolen data on encrypted online platforms. These markets allow buyers and sellers to operate anonymously, using cryptocurrencies for transactions and layered communication tools to evade surveillance. The rise of darknet commerce has democratized access for smaller criminal groups, while large organizations continue to dominate high-volume operations through technological expertise, trust networks, and logistical control. Despite the sophistication of these systems, law enforcement has made significant inroads in understanding and disrupting hidden economies. Joint operations by Interpol, Europol, the DEA, and national police agencies have led to the seizure of hundreds of tons of narcotics, billions of dollars in cryptocurrency, and the dismantling of human trafficking rings. Yet the adaptability of criminal networks is remarkable. When one channel is disrupted, another emerges. According to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, this cat-and-mouse dynamic is a defining characteristic of modern organized crime. The evolution of hidden economies underscores a critical truth. organized crime is increasingly intertwined with legitimate global systems. From cryptocurrency exchanges to shipping companies, gangs exploit legal infrastructure to conceal operations, launder money, and facilitate cross-border trafficking. They are financial innovators and logistical strategists, operating in ways that blur the line between illegal and legal commerce. According to financial crime reports, the combination of traditional enforcement, digital innovation, and global mobility allows gangs to achieve operational scale that was unimaginable even 2 decades ago. Furthermore, hidden economies exert profound social and political influence. Revenue generated through illicit activity finances corruption, bribery, and enforcement of territorial control. In some regions, gangs provide quasi-governmental services, controlling local security, distributing resources, and enforcing rules within their communities. According to reports from the U.S. Department of State, in parts of Central America and Mexico, gang-controlled neighborhoods often operate as parallel societies, where traditional state services are replaced by gang enforcement. This intersection of crime, governance, and finance creates a powerful incentive for gangs to maintain operational secrecy while simultaneously expanding influence. In conclusion, the modern gang is no longer a street-level operation. It is a globalized, diversified enterprise. According to reports from the DEA, Interpol, UNODC, and Europol, criminal organizations now operate across multiple sectors: drug trafficking, cybercrime, human trafficking, and cryptocurrency laundering. They combine historical methods of control with technological innovation, financial acumen, and strategic planning, creating sophisticated networks that can survive disruption and adapt to changing enforcement landscape. Hidden economies allow gangs to maintain influence, generate wealth, and expand their reach while remaining largely invisible to authorities. Understanding these hidden economies is essential to comprehending the modern criminal underworld. The interplay of drugs, digital finance, and human trafficking creates a multifaceted, resilient structure capable of operating globally. Law enforcement faces unprecedented challenges in confronting organizations that are decentralized, technologically adept, and financially sophisticated. The next evolution of gang power lies not only in violence or territorial control but in mastery over hidden economies, an invisible empire where information, money, and strategy are as potent as guns and drugs. The unexpected allies. When gangs and governments intersect, the relationship between organized crime and the state is rarely simple. While governments are tasked with enforcing laws and maintaining order, history reveals periods when authorities have strategically engaged with criminal organizations, leveraging their networks, resources, and influence for political, military, or economic objectives. These alliances are often covert, ethically ambiguous, and fraught with long-term consequences, but they underscore a critical reality. In certain contexts, the boundary between law enforcement and organized crime is not absolute. One of the most well-documented intersections occurred during the Cold War, when intelligence agencies in the United States and Western Europe explored partnerships with criminal networks for strategic advantage. According to declassified CIA and Pentagon documents, the agency occasionally collaborated with organized crime figures to achieve covert objectives that conventional military or diplomatic channels could not accomplish. A notable example involves Operation Underworld, a World War II-era initiative where the U.S. Navy and Office of Naval Intelligence enlisted mafia figures in New York to secure the docks against sabotage. The operation, detailed in congressional hearings and declassified CIA reports, relied on mafia networks' intimate knowledge of waterfront logistics and labor unions. These individuals helped prevent potential sabotage of ships and facilitated intelligence gathering in critical port areas, demonstrating a pragmatic, if morally complex, use of criminal networks in national security operations. Similarly, in the context of the Latin American Cold War, governments and intelligence agencies sometimes employed local gangs and paramilitary organizations as proxies in covert operations. Declassified U.S. Department of State cables and investigative journalism, including reporting by the New York Times, reveal that the CIA and allied agencies occasionally provided funding, weapons, and logistical support to militias with deep ties to organized crime. These groups were tasked with counterinsurgency operations in countries like Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Guatemala during the 1980s. Criminal networks offered established smuggling routes, street-level enforcement, and intelligence channels that were otherwise inaccessible to state forces. While these alliances advanced strategic objectives, they also legitimized criminal actors, entrenched local violence, and complicated post-conflict governance. The drug trade has also intersected with government operations in controversial ways. Historical investigations into U.S. supported anti-communist movements in Central America, particularly in the 1980s, revealed that some rebel factions funded their operations through narcotics trafficking. Reporting by the San Jose Mercury News, 1996, and the CIA Inspector General confirmed that cocaine and other illicit substances were used to finance paramilitary and anti-communist campaigns. While U.S. authorities denied direct complicity, the overlap between rebel operations and organized crime networks illustrates a situation where strategic imperatives overshadowed legal and ethical considerations. Criminal enterprises gained material support and operational experience, while governments achieved tactical goals, leaving long-term social consequences in their wake. Even outside the Americas, law enforcement has occasionally engaged with criminal networks to achieve immediate objectives. In Italy, the Sicilian Mafia played a complex role in anti-communist political strategies during the 20th century. Declassified Italian parliamentary reports confirm that local officials and intelligence units sometimes tolerated or indirectly leveraged mafia influence to suppress left-wing movements or secure electoral outcomes. While these interactions were far from formal alliances, they reveal a pragmatic acknowledgement of the mafia's embedded power in communities, particularly when conventional law enforcement proved ineffective or slow. The intersection of gangs and government is not limited to wartime or political contexts. It also extends into law enforcement operations against other criminal threats. The FBI's infiltration of organized crime in the 1970s and 1980s, as revealed in public records and investigative reporting, often involved negotiations and temporary truces with certain factions to secure intelligence on rival groups. The Joseph Pistone case, Donnie Brasco, illustrates this dynamic. Pistone's undercover infiltration of the Bonanno crime family in New York allowed law enforcement to gather critical evidence on organized crime operations. While Pistone operated against the mafia, his ability to build trust, understand internal rules, and navigate complex criminal networks demonstrates the necessity of leveraging insider knowledge, often provided by former or cooperating gang members, to achieve broader law enforcement objectives. In South America, similar dynamics have been observed with local gangs. During the drug wars in Colombia, government forces occasionally relied on intelligence from incarcerated cartel members or loosely affiliated paramilitaries to target rival factions. Investigative reports from BBC News, 2019, and court filings indicate that some incarcerated figures cooperated in exchange for reduced sentences or protection, providing insight into supply chains, leadership structures, and enforcement mechanisms. While morally and legally contentious, these arrangements illustrate how state actors sometimes utilize criminal expertise to confront greater threat. The consequences of these alliances are significant. Gangs gain legitimacy, resources, and strategic knowledge, often strengthening their operations long after the government's tactical objective has been achieved. In Central America, decades of covert engagement with criminal or paramilitary groups have contributed to enduring gang influence, as evidenced by the rise of MS-13 and 18th Street gangs. These organizations exploited the post-conflict vacuum, leveraging networks established during politically driven operations to expand into drug trafficking, extortion, and transnational crime. The result is a feedback loop where temporary alliances create long-term empowerment of criminal networks. Modern examples of gang-state intersections are also visible in anti-terrorism operations. According to U.S. Department of Defense and United Nations reports, law enforcement in regions like West Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America has sometimes engaged with local criminal networks to stabilize volatile regions. In these cases, gangs or militias are co-opted for intelligence, logistics, or enforcement tasks. While these collaborations can yield short-term tactical success, they risk legitimizing groups with histories of human rights abuses, creating moral and operational dilemmas. One recurring theme is the utility of gangs in environments where traditional governance is weak. In neighborhoods or regions with limited state presence, criminal organizations maintain order, control markets, and manage enforcement. Governments and security forces, recognizing the entrenched power of these networks, sometimes choose to negotiate, co-opt, or temporarily tolerate their operations. Reports from Interpol and Human Rights Watch document instances in which law enforcement agencies in Latin America and the Caribbean engaged local gangs to mediate violence or secure territories during anti-drug campaigns. While pragmatic, such strategies reinforce gang authority and blur the line between legality and complicity. The interplay between criminal networks and government forces illustrates a fundamental tension: the immediate utility of gang collaboration versus long-term societal consequences. Historical cases, from Cold War operations to contemporary counter-narcotics campaigns, show that short-term tactical gains can entrench criminal influence, distort local governance, and perpetuate cycles of violence. Declassified documents, investigative journalism, and court filings all confirm that these alliances are rarely neutral. They carry costs that extend far beyond the operational moment. Finally, the ethics of gang-government collaboration remain a subject of debate among policymakers, legal scholars, and human rights advocates. While strategic necessity may justify temporary engagement, transparency, oversight, and accountability are often lacking. In many cases, governments acknowledge operational benefits while failing to address long-term social consequences, such as the empowerment of gangs, community destabilization, and the normalization of illicit activity. Historical and contemporary evidence indicates that these consequences can endure for decades, shaping both criminal networks and public perceptions of state authority. In conclusion, the relationship between gangs and governments is complex, multifaceted, and historically documented. From World War II collaborations with the Mafia to Cold War paramilitary operations, from intelligence gathering to anti-drug campaigns, state actors have occasionally leveraged criminal networks to achieve strategic goals. These alliances reveal the adaptability of gangs, their embedded influence, and the pragmatism, or desperation, of government decision-making in high-stakes scenarios. While effective in the short term, these intersections often leave enduring legacies, empowering criminal networks and complicating law enforcement efforts for generations. The lesson is clear: organized crime is not always an external adversary. In some historical and geopolitical contexts, it has been a reluctant partner, exploited for tactical purposes while retaining its inherent autonomy and capacity for resilience. Understanding this uneasy alliance is crucial to comprehending the modern criminal landscape, where gangs, governments, and covert operations intersect in ways that are rarely visible to the public but profoundly shape global crime and security dynamics. From survival to power. The psychology of loyalty. At the heart of every criminal network lies a powerful, often overlooked force: human psychology. While guns, drugs, and money are tangible tools of control, loyalty, psychological, emotional, and social, is the invisible glue that sustains gangs. Understanding why individuals join, obey, and sometimes sacrifice everything for these organizations reveals not just how gangs endure, but why they wield influence that stretches across prisons, cities, and continents. Gang membership frequently begins with survival. In economically marginalized neighborhoods across Los Angeles, Chicago, Baltimore, and San Salvador, adolescents and young adults confront poverty, violence, and social exclusion. Research from the University of Chicago's Crime Lab shows that in these environments, joining a gang can provide protection against rival groups, access to resources, and a sense of identity otherwise unavailable. For many young recruits, gangs serve as surrogate families, offering structure, rules, and loyalty in contexts where social institutions have failed. The psychological appeal is immediate: the promise of safety, respect, and belonging in exchange for obedience. This phenomenon is echoed globally. In South Africa, reports from Amnesty International indicate that township gangs in Cape Town recruit children as young as 10, offering security and economic opportunity amid extreme poverty. In Central America, gang leaders like MS-13's captains exploit the absence of reliable government services, presenting themselves as protectors while simultaneously exerting strict control. Human behavior studies emphasize that individuals are more likely to adhere to organizations that fulfill core psychological needs: safety, recognition, and social connectedness. For many, the gang provides these needs in environments where legitimate avenues are inaccessible. Once an individual is recruited, the psychology of loyalty intensifies. Initiation rituals, codes of conduct, and hierarchical ranking are central to embedding obedience and fostering trust. For instance, the Aryan Brotherhood and Nuestra Familia in U.S. prisons employ rigorous initiation processes, including oaths, formal pledges, and enforced secrecy. Court filings and FBI reports confirm that violation of these codes, whether through betrayal, failure to follow orders, or disrespect toward higher-ranking members, often triggers severe punishment, from physical assault to isolation. This combination of reward and threat reinforces psychological adherence. Loyalty is incentivized by belonging and enforced by fear. Psychologists studying gang behavior note that loyalty is often maintained through shared ideology and identity. Members adopt symbols, tattoos, and rituals that signify belonging to a specific organization. For example, MS-13 members frequently tattoo MS or the gang's full name across their bodies, signaling commitment and making defection psychologically costly. The Italian Mafia and Yakuza similarly employ tattoos and ceremonial rituals to create enduring bonds. Anthropologists describe these markers as a form of social contract. The gang becomes an extension of self, entwining personal identity with organizational survival. Abandoning the gang risks not only physical retaliation but profound identity disruption. Trauma and environmental conditioning also play a role in loyalty. Many gang members have experienced childhood exposure to violence, neglect, or familial instability. According to interviews with former gang members, including figures like Sonika Shakur, Monster Cody, early trauma fosters susceptibility to gang recruitment. The structured hierarchy of gangs, combined with clear rules and immediate reinforcement, offers predictability in an otherwise chaotic life. Social psychologists describe this as the trauma-to-loyalty pathway. Early adversity creates a heightened need for security and belonging, which gangs provide in abundance. Incarceration further reinforces loyalty. Studies conducted in Pelican Bay, Folsom, and ADX Florence prisons show that confined members of gangs rely on each other for protection, resources, and status. Solitary confinement, long-term imprisonment, and prison hierarchies intensify dependence on gang affiliation. Leaders cultivate obedience through mentorship and surveillance, ensuring that even in isolation, members internalize the organization's codes. Legal filings from California Department of Corrections investigations reveal that these internalized codes persist after release, allowing gangs to maintain influence in communities and continue coordinating criminal activities. Ideology and group identity often surpass fear as a motivator. Many members adopt the gang's internal narrative, whether racial supremacy in white prison gangs, ethnic solidarity in Latin American networks, or religious or cultural justifications in other regions. According to criminology research from John Jay College of Criminal Justice, ideology provides a cognitive framework that normalizes risk, rationalizes violence, and reinforces loyalty. Gang members internalize a worldview in which obedience is virtuous, betrayal is existentially threatening, and allegiance is paramount. This internalization allows leaders to mobilize members with minimal coercion. Loyalty is a self-reinforcing principle, not merely an external imposition. Peer pressure and social reinforcement amplify the effect. Within tightly knit gangs, deviation from norms carries social consequences: ostracism, humiliation, and diminished status. Field research conducted in Baltimore and Los Angeles demonstrates that peer enforcement is as effective as formal penalties. Members surveil each other, monitor compliance, and reward conformity. This creates a feedback loop where loyalty is continuously validated and disobedience is self-policed. Social psychology terms this collective reinforcement, a mechanism that ensures adherence even in the absence of direct leadership oversight. Economic incentives also play a pivotal role. Membership offers access to illicit revenue streams: street-level drug sales, extortion, human trafficking, and robbery. Law enforcement reports from the DEA and FBI indicate that revenue distribution is often tied to rank and loyalty. Members who demonstrate obedience and competence gain financial advantage, while noncompliance results in exclusion or punishment. The combination of economic benefit, psychological reinforcement, and peer validation creates a robust system that is remarkably resistant to external intervention. Yet loyalty is not static; it is dynamic and negotiable under pressure. Former gang members testify that loyalty can erode under circumstances such as prolonged imprisonment, disillusionment with leadership, or exposure to alternative support systems. Reentry programs in Baltimore, Cape Town, and Manila report that mentorship, education, and vocational training can weaken the psychological hold of gangs. This underscores a critical insight. Loyalty is sustained not only by fear or ideology but also by the perceived absence of alternative. When pathways to safety, identity, and economic opportunity exist outside the gang, the psychological grip can be diminished. Understanding gang loyalty also requires examining intergenerational dynamics. In neighborhoods where gangs have entrenched power, children grow up observing the social, economic, and political influence of criminal networks. Sociological studies in Rio de Janeiro's favelas and Los Angeles's gang territories reveal that gang membership is often normalized from adolescence, with loyalty cultivated as a means of survival and social integration. In these contexts, loyalty is not merely an individual choice but a culturally embedded expectation. It becomes a mechanism for navigating risk, asserting identity, and securing belonging in environments where traditional structures of governance, education, and economic opportunity are absent. Ultimately, the psychology of loyalty explains how gangs endure and adapt. Leaders exploit environmental pressures, trauma, ideology, and economic incentives to bind members psychologically and socially. This loyalty allows gangs to maintain operational control across neighborhoods, prisons, and international borders. It also explains why some members willingly engage in extreme violence, risk long-term imprisonment, and accept personal danger. Their allegiance is reinforced by identity, survival, and community embeddedness. In conclusion, loyalty is the invisible engine powering organized crime. It emerges from survival imperatives, psychological need, peer reinforcement, ideological indoctrination, and economic incentive. Gangs that cultivate loyalty are resilient, adaptive, and capable of sustaining influence in the face of incarceration, law enforcement pressure, and social disruption. By understanding the psychological foundations of loyalty, law enforcement, social workers, and policymakers gain insight into why gangs endure, why they adapt so effectively, and why disengagement is so difficult for those trapped within these systems. The story of loyalty is, at its core, a story of human need, the need for safety, identity, community, and purpose. Gangs exploit these needs with ruthless efficiency, transforming survival instincts into disciplined allegiance. It is this psychological architecture that underpins organized crime, enabling it to persist across generations, borders, and institutions, a force as invisible as it is formidable. The unseen victims: families, communities, and children. While gang members often dominate headlines for violence, drug trafficking, and organized crime, there is another story less frequently told: the story of the victims who live in the shadows of these networks. Families, communities, and children bear the long-term consequences of gang operations, often enduring cycles of trauma, poverty, and fear that span generations. Their experiences illuminate the societal cost of organized crime beyond arrests and prosecutions. In cities like Chicago, Los Angeles, and Baltimore, entire neighborhoods are shaped by the presence of gangs. Sociological studies conducted by John Jay College of Criminal Justice and University of Chicago Crime Lab reveal that residents often experience persistent fear, restricted mobility, and disrupted social cohesion. Children growing up in these neighborhoods frequently witness violence, intimidation, and extortion firsthand. School attendance is often compromised, not merely because of poverty, but due to the direct threat of gang recruitment or retaliation. A 2019 study in Chicago found that in neighborhoods with high gang density, adolescents are more than 3 times as likely to drop out of school compared to peers in safer areas. The ripple effect of gang activity extends to employment, public health, and social trust, fundamentally altering life trajectories. Families are among the most immediate victims of gang influence. According to reports from Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, gang members often exploit familial ties for recruitment, coercion, or protection. In El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, children as young as 10 are pressured to join local gangs like MS-13 or 18th Street, sometimes to protect older siblings or parents from violence. Failure to comply can result in death threats, kidnapping, or social ostracism. Parents report living under constant surveillance, fearful that any attempt to intervene could provoke retaliation. In the United States, similar patterns emerge. Families of incarcerated gang members often experience harassment, extortion, or threats from rival factions, illustrating that proximity to organized crime carries persistent danger regardless of personal involvement. In Latin America, the social cost is compounded by state weakness and corruption. According to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, in countries like Brazil, gang-controlled favelas function as quasi-governments, enforcing rules, administering extortion, and regulating informal economy. While these structures may provide some protection or predictability, they simultaneously restrict freedom, generate fear, and normalize violence. Children grow up in environments where criminal codes replace civil law, and where survival requires navigating intricate networks of loyalty and obedience. Interviews documented by BBC News, 2022, in Rio de Janeiro show teenagers describing fear as a constant companion, learning from a young age that stepping out of line, even unintentionally, can result in lethal consequences. The psychological impact on children is profound. Studies from the American Psychological Association and Harvard University's Center on the Developing Child indicate that chronic exposure to community violence leads to trauma, anxiety, depression, and difficulties with cognitive and emotional development. For children in gang-dominated neighborhoods, witnessing shootings, arrests, or intimidation is not an occasional event, it is routine. Trauma is compounded when family members are actively involved in gang activity, incarcerated, or victims of retaliatory violence. Long-term effects include diminished educational attainment, increased likelihood of substance abuse, and a higher propensity for involvement in criminal activity themselves, creating intergenerational cycles of violence and victimization. Communities as a whole also suffer economic and social consequences. Businesses in gang-dominated areas face extortion, theft, and vandalism, limiting economic opportunity and discouraging external investment. Law enforcement presence, while necessary for security, is often insufficient or reactive, creating an environment where informal enforcement by gangs dominates daily life. According to Urban Institute reports, neighborhoods controlled by gangs experience higher rates of unemployment, reduced access to healthcare, and poorer public services compared to comparable areas with lower gang activity. These structural disadvantages reinforce the power of criminal organizations, as residents rely on gangs for basic security or economic support. The role of women within these affected communities is particularly significant. Human rights investigations in Central America and the United States reveal that women often bear the burden of protection and mediation. Mothers may negotiate with gang members to prevent their children from being recruited or to secure safe passage in public spaces. In some regions, women are coerced into participation, whether through extortion, sexual exploitation, or forced labor, as a means of enforcing gang control. Reports from Amnesty International 2020 and Human Rights Watch 2021 document cases where women live in constant fear, their autonomy curtailed by the ever-present threat of violence. These experiences highlight the gendered dimensions of gang impact, where family structures are leveraged to sustain power and enforce compliance. Elderly residents are not spared either. In neighborhoods where gang dominance persists, older adults frequently experience intimidation, theft, or displacement. Investigative reporting from Chicago Tribune shows that elderly homeowners are pressured to pay protection money or vacate properties for gang-controlled rental schemes. The social fabric of neighborhoods erodes, as community cohesion is replaced by fear-based compliance, and informal support networks collapse under the weight of intimidation. Internationally, the consequences are equally stark. In Central America, gang influence has contributed to one of the highest homicide rates in the world. According to UNODC homicide statistics, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala consistently rank among the most dangerous countries globally, largely due to gang violence. Families face extortion, recruitment pressures, and retaliatory killings, while communities experience chronic insecurity. In South Africa, gangs in Cape Town townships similarly exert control over entire neighborhoods, dictating economic activity, enforcing curfews, and punishing perceived disobedience. Children growing up in these areas describe normalized violence as part of daily life, with schools and community programs often unable to provide safety or intervention. The collateral impact of gang activity also extends to education and public health. Schools in gang-controlled neighborhoods are frequently targeted for extortion or recruitment, limiting access to education. Health outcomes are adversely affected. Chronic stress, trauma, and exposure to violence contribute to higher rates of mental health disorders, substance abuse, and premature mortality. According to Centers for Disease Control and Prevention (CDC) reports, youth exposed to gang-related violence are at elevated risk for post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, depression, and anxiety, which in turn affect academic achievement and long-term social outcomes. Yet, despite the pervasive threat, resilience exists. Community-based organizations, faith groups, and reentry programs provide vital support for affected families. In Baltimore, programs like Safe Streets intervene to mediate conflicts, mentor youth, and provide alternatives to gang involvement. In Rio de Janeiro, NGOs facilitate after-school programs and psychosocial support for children in favelas. These interventions highlight the importance of addressing the social and psychological dimensions of gang influence, recognizing that the unseen victims, families, communities, and children, are essential to breaking cycles of violence. In conclusion, the human cost of gang activity extends far beyond arrests, convictions, and street-level violence. Families live under constant threat. Children endure trauma that shapes their development and life trajectory. Communities experience economic and social destabilization that persists across generations. Data from the UNODC, Human Rights Watch, CDC, and multiple academic studies confirm that the influence of gangs permeates every facet of life in affected neighborhoods. While law enforcement and policy measures are essential, understanding and addressing the needs of these unseen victims is equally critical. The story of gangs is incomplete without acknowledging those who suffer quietly in their shadows. For every gang leader in prison or on the streets, there are families navigating fear, communities struggling to maintain cohesion, and children forced to grow up too quickly in environments dominated by violence. Recognizing their experiences is vital, not only to comprehend the full impact of organized crime, but to craft effective interventions that restore safety, opportunity, and hope. Gangs may wield power, but the resilience of communities and families, when supported by social programs and justice interventions, offers a pathway to break the cycles that sustain these networks. For the unseen victims, survival often requires courage, resourcefulness, and solidarity, a quiet, persistent form of resistance against an invisible but pervasive enemy. Whistleblowers and double agent. In the hidden world of gangs and organized crime, the most valuable intelligence often comes from those who once belonged to the network. Whistleblowers and double agents provide unique insight into the inner workings of these organizations, how orders are given, loyalties enforced, and illegal operations managed across streets, prisons, and borders. Their stories reveal the high stakes, extraordinary risks, and moral complexities of exposing criminal power from within. One of the most infamous cases in history is Joseph Pistone, better known as Donnie Brasco, whose infiltration of the Bonanno crime family in New York during the late 1970s and early 1980s transformed law enforcement's understanding of mafia operations. According to FBI case files, Pistone, under a deep-cover identity, spent 6 years living as a trusted member of the family, attending meetings, managing minor operations, and observing rituals of trust and punishment. His intelligence allowed the FBI to indict over 200 members of the mafia, dismantle rackets, and prevent numerous crimes. The operation was so dangerous that Pistone had to maintain secrecy not only from law enforcement's broader hierarchy, but from his family, friends, and even colleagues. Declassified FBI reports detail the constant threat of discovery. Being found out would likely have meant execution. Pistone's experience underscores a critical reality: insider knowledge is irreplaceable. Criminal organizations are inherently secretive, enforcing loyalty through fear, tradition, and social pressure. Standard surveillance and investigative techniques often cannot penetrate the layers of hierarchy, coded communication, and internal policing within these groups. Whistleblowers or double agents provide access to information that is otherwise invisible, from leadership structures and revenue flows to operational procedures and enforcement strategies. Outside the U.S., similar dynamics exist within transnational gangs. In Central America, former MS-13 members have served as informants or defectors, assisting law enforcement in mapping networks that span countries. Interviews with law enforcement officials in El Salvador and Honduras reveal that defectors provide detailed accounts of recruitment strategies, territorial disputes, and the internal chain of command. These insiders explain the enforcement mechanisms used to maintain discipline, such as threats, beatings, and ritualized punishment. Their testimonies often lead to arrests, prosecutions, and disruption of criminal operations, though they place the informant at extreme personal risk. Financial insiders also play a critical role. For example, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, former accountant for Mexico's Sinaloa cartel, became a key source for authorities investigating the cartel's money laundering operations. Publicly reported court documents and DEA investigative reports indicate that Gonzalez Valencia had access to the cartel's international financial network, including offshore accounts, cryptocurrency transfers, and shell companies. Her cooperation with U.S. authorities revealed the mechanisms by which billions of dollars in illicit funds were moved, concealed, and reinvested. Without such internal testimony, dismantling the cartel's financial infrastructure would have been nearly impossible. The use of insiders is not limited to individual actors. Entire groups sometimes defect or cooperate with authorities. In Italy, the Ndrangheta and Cosa Nostra experienced significant setbacks in the late 20th century due to the phenomenon of the pentiti, members who provided testimony against their own organizations. According to Italian law enforcement and parliamentary reports, pentiti such as Tommaso Buscetta offered detailed accounts of internal operations, initiation rituals, and cross-border criminal connections. Their testimony facilitated mass arrests, asset seizures, and legislative reforms targeting mafia operations. These defectors, however, often faced extraordinary personal risk, including threats to their families and the possibility of assassination. Protection programs were essential to ensure their survival while enabling authorities to act on their intelligence. The psychological toll on whistleblowers and double agents is profound. According to criminological studies from John Jay College of Criminal Justice, defecting from a gang or criminal organization requires severing deep social bonds, renegotiating personal identity, and managing constant fear of retaliation. Informants often experience isolation, anxiety, and moral conflict. They are caught between loyalty to former comrades, self-preservation, and civic responsibility. In many cases, the decision to cooperate is motivated by both pragmatic considerations, such as reduced sentencing or personal safety, and moral calculations regarding the broader societal harm inflicted by the organization. Whistleblowers often employ sophisticated methods to maintain secrecy and security. Undercover operatives like Pistone adopted cover identities, carefully curated social relationships, and rigorous operational discipline to avoid exposure. Financial insiders, such as cartel accountants, maintain anonymity and carefully document evidence to support law enforcement objectives without alerting the network. In prison settings, informants may communicate through intermediaries, coded letters, or legal correspondence, leveraging the minimal contact allowed in high-security facilities. These methods are essential because discovery can lead to immediate violence or death. International cooperation amplifies the value of insider information. Criminal organizations operate across borders, exploiting jurisdictional gaps, inconsistent enforcement, and communication challenges. Agencies such as Interpol, Europol, the DEA, and national law enforcement units rely on defectors to map cross-border networks, trace illicit financial flows, and identify leadership hierarchies. For example, testimony from former cartel members has revealed smuggling routes from South America into the United States and Europe, the identities of corrupt officials, and methods used to launder illicit proceeds through international financial institutions. Without this internal intelligence, law enforcement would be forced to rely solely on surveillance and seizure operations, which provide only a partial understanding of the organization's structure. The consequences for defectors, however, are often lifelong. Relocation, witness protection, and constant monitoring are necessary for survival. Testimonies from law enforcement officials indicate that some whistleblowers must adopt entirely new identities, severing ties to families and communities. The psychological and emotional toll is immense, as individuals navigate guilt, fear, and the burden of responsibility for lives potentially endangered by their disclosures. Despite these challenges, their contribution remains indispensable to combating organized crime. Whistleblowers also serve as catalysts for broader legal and structural reforms. In the U.S., insider testimony led to the enactment of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO, which allows prosecutors to pursue entire criminal networks rather than individual actors. Similarly, in Italy, pentiti testimony enabled anti-mafia legislation, asset seizure laws, and judicial reforms that disrupted entrenched criminal organizations. These cases demonstrate that the courage and insight of insiders have far-reaching implications, not only for immediate prosecutions but for systemic change. Beyond individual cases, the stories of double agents reveal the resilience and adaptability of criminal organizations. Defectors often face retaliation, highlighting the organization's capacity for intelligence gathering, surveillance, and enforcement. Law enforcement reports indicate that gangs maintain internal loyalty monitoring, employ counterintelligence, and sometimes infiltrate external agencies to identify potential threats. This cat-and-mouse dynamic underscores both the danger and the value of insider cooperation. Criminal networks are sophisticated, and only those with intimate knowledge can penetrate them effectively. Finally, whistleblowers illustrate a moral complexity rarely captured in headlines. They occupy a liminal space between criminal complicity and civic duty, navigating loyalty, survival, and ethical responsibility. Their decisions illuminate the human dimension of organized crime, the fear, risk, and courage involved in exposing networks that thrive on secrecy, intimidation, and absolute control. In conclusion, whistleblowers and double agents are indispensable in understanding and dismantling organized crime. Figures like Joseph Pistone, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, and Italian pentiti provide critical insight into leadership hierarchies, operational logistics, financial systems, and enforcement strategies. Their testimonies enable law enforcement to disrupt criminal networks, prosecute leaders, and safeguard communities. At the same time, the personal risks they endure underscore the extreme danger inherent in infiltrating such organizations. The stories of whistleblowers reveal that organized crime is not an impenetrable monolith. With courage, intelligence, and support, insiders can expose the machinery of violence, trafficking, and illicit profit, reshaping law enforcement strategies and transforming the fight against criminal empires. Yet their narratives also highlight the human cost of confrontation, fear, isolation, and the ever-present shadow of retaliation. In the world of gangs and organized crime, these individuals are both agents of justice and enduring symbols of the perilous balance between loyalty and morality. Redemption and exit. The impossible escape. Leaving a gang is rarely a simple act. For members embedded in hierarchical, tightly controlled networks, departure represents not only a personal transformation but a profound risk. Loyalty, fear, and identity are intertwined so deeply that breaking away can feel impossible. Yet, amidst the shadows of organized crime, some individuals have managed to escape, navigating a dangerous path from survival to redemption while confronting the persistent threat of retaliation. In the United States, stories of reformed gang members illustrate both the peril and potential of leaving the life behind. In Baltimore, former members of the Bloods and Crips have recounted the intense social pressure they faced to maintain allegiance. According to interviews documented by the Baltimore Sun, attempting to leave without protection often provoked violent retribution, either from the gang itself or rival groups perceiving vulnerability. Successful exit strategies frequently involved structured intervention programs, relocation, and support networks that could provide safety, employment, and community reintegration. Without these mechanisms, defectors faced a near impossible challenge, abandoning a life defined by loyalty, criminal enterprise, and social identity. Internationally, the stakes are often even higher. In El Salvador, former members of MS-13 described leaving the gang as a near impossible endeavor. Testimonies collected by Human Rights Watch, 2018, indicate that escape requires both physical relocation and psychological transformation. Members must sever communication with their former networks, often under threat of death for perceived betrayal. Programs funded by the Salvadoran government and international NGOs provide critical support, including vocational training, counseling, and relocation. However, success rates are limited, and many who attempt to leave without support face murder or kidnapping. The extreme risk underscores the structural power these gangs maintain over their members and the communities they control. Leaving prison-based gangs poses additional complexities. Incarcerated leaders of groups such as Nuestra Familia, Aryan Brotherhood, or LAIM often maintain influence over street operations from behind bars. According to California Department of Corrections reports, even after release, former members remain vulnerable due to tattoos, criminal records, and the potential for retaliation. Some defectors enter witness protection programs or relocate to entirely new cities under assumed identities. Others engage with community organizations that provide mentorship and social support, helping them transition from organized crime to legitimate livelihood. Interviews with former inmates highlight that psychological dependency on the gang is as formidable a barrier as physical threat. Members often grapple with loss of identity, belonging, and purpose, complicating the process of disengagement. Rehabilitation programs offer structured pathways for reintegration. In Cape Town, South Africa, initiatives such as Ceasefire and Street Smart provide mentorship, vocational training, and mediation services for former gang members. According to program evaluations, these interventions reduce recidivism, decrease exposure to violence, and facilitate reintegration into the workforce. Participants learn conflict resolution, financial literacy, and emotional regulation, skills critical for navigating life outside the gang. However, the transition is never straightforward. The social stigma attached to former gang affiliation, coupled with persistent threats from former associates, demands continuous vigilance and support. Education and employment are essential components of successful exit strategies. Studies from John Jay College of Criminal Justice demonstrate that former gang members with access to vocational training, stable housing, and employment opportunities are significantly more likely to sustain long-term disengagement. Without these supports, the lure of immediate financial gain and the psychological comfort of belonging often draw individuals back into criminal networks. This tension between economic survival and personal transformation is a central obstacle in the exit process. Faith and community support also play a transformative role. In Manila, Philippine gang rehabilitation programs led by faith-based organizations provide spiritual guidance, counseling, and mentorship for former gang members. These programs emphasize accountability, personal responsibility, and reintegration into the community. Reports from the Philippine Department of the Interior and local government indicate that participants benefit from structured environments that offer protection from retaliation and consistent support during the transition period. Such programs highlight the multidimensional nature of gang exit strategies. Psychological, social, economic, and spiritual support all contribute to successful disengagement. The role of family is equally critical. Rebuilding relationships with family members or creating surrogate support systems provides emotional stability that mitigates the risks associated with leaving gangs. Studies in the United States, Latin America, and South Africa demonstrate that individuals with supportive family networks are less likely to relapse into criminal activity. Conversely, estrangement or familial involvement in gangs often perpetuates cycles of violence and recruitment, complicating exit efforts. Legal frameworks can both aid and complicate the process. Witness protection programs, reduced sentencing, and pardons incentivize cooperation and defection, yet criminal records, parole restrictions, and ongoing surveillance often limit mobility and opportunity. According to U.S. Department of Justice reports, some former gang members struggle to access housing, employment, and education due to these legal constraints, leaving them exposed to financial hardship and the social pressures of former networks. Despite these challenges, successful exits are possible and, when achieved, have profound ripple effects. In Baltimore, former gang members now lead community organizations focused on mentorship, violence prevention, and youth education. In Cape Town, reformed members mediate conflicts between rival gangs, reducing localized violence. In Manila, rehabilitated individuals work with NGOs to support at-risk youth and prevent recruitment into criminal networks. These examples illustrate that leaving the gang is not only a personal victory but also a social one, contributing to community resilience, public safety, and intergenerational change. One notable psychological factor in successful exit is identity reconstruction. Leaving a gang requires replacing a lifelong identity built around loyalty, fear, and criminal enterprise with a new framework grounded in legality, personal values, and community integration. Former members often undergo extensive counseling to address trauma, guilt, and social conditioning, rebuilding self-concept in environments that may still be hostile or threatening. This identity transformation is essential to sustain disengagement and avoid relapse. Finally, the stories of those who leave highlight the paradoxical nature of organized crime. Gangs offer protection, identity, and economic opportunity, but at tremendous risk. The choice to exit is an act of courage, often requiring a combination of external support, strategic planning, and psychological resilience. Success is possible, but only when individuals have access to comprehensive resources, safe environments, and pathways to legitimacy. In conclusion, leaving a gang is one of the most challenging undertakings in the criminal world. Threats of retaliation, social isolation, and psychological conditioning create formidable barriers. Yet, with structured support, community programs, education, employment, legal protection, and family networks, exit is achievable. The individuals who navigate this path exemplify resilience, courage, and the capacity for transformation. Their stories underscore that the fight against organized crime is not only about arrests and prosecutions but also about rehabilitation, reintegration, and the restoration of human potential. The journey from survival to freedom is perilous, but it is possible. Former gang members who escape the cycle of violence become symbols of hope, demonstrating that even the most entrenched criminal systems can be challenged, one life at a time. Their experiences provide critical lessons for policymakers, law enforcement, and society at large. True justice is not only punitive but restorative, offering a path from darkness into light. The future of underground power. The world of organized crime has always been defined by adaptability. From the streets of New York to the favelas of Rio de Janeiro, from high-security U.S. prisons to rural enclaves in Southeast Asia, criminal organizations have evolved in response to law enforcement, social change, and technology. But as the 21st century unfolds, the next frontier of underground power is no longer physical territory or brute force, it is digital. Organized crime is entering a new era, driven by AI, cryptocurrency, darknet networks, and cyber-enabled operations, creating threats that are simultaneously invisible, scalable, and global. One of the most striking transformations is the rise of cybercrime as a primary revenue source. While traditional gangs relied on drugs, extortion, and human trafficking, modern networks increasingly exploit digital vulnerabilities to generate income. According to Europol's Internet Organized Crime Threat Assessment 2021, ransomware attacks alone generate billions of dollars annually. Cyber-enabled gangs are no longer constrained by geography. A hacker cell in Eastern Europe can disrupt a bank in the United States while remaining undetectable. In these environments, traditional law enforcement methods struggle to keep pace. The intelligence required to trace cryptocurrency, encrypted communications, and virtual assets is highly specialized, creating an environment where only the most sophisticated criminal organizations can thrive. Cryptocurrency has become a cornerstone of modern gang operations. The pseudonymous nature of blockchain transactions allows criminal enterprises to move money across borders with reduced risk of detection. Law enforcement agencies, including the DEA, Europol, and Financial Action Task Force (FATF), have documented cases where gangs launder illicit funds through Bitcoin, Monero, and other privacy-focused coins. Criminals integrate cryptocurrency with traditional methods, shell companies, offshore accounts, and real estate to create complex, multi-layered laundering schemes. This digital evolution mirrors the historical adaptability of gangs. While old-school operations relied on streets, prisons, and docks, today's networks exploit code, encryption, and decentralized finance. The darknet provides another layer of anonymity and scalability. According to U.S. Department of Justice reports, criminal organizations operate hidden marketplaces for drugs, weapons, stolen data, and counterfeit goods. These platforms allow buyers and sellers to interact without revealing identities, using encryption and cryptocurrency for transactions. Darknet marketplaces have democratized access for smaller groups while providing large criminal organizations the ability to dominate high-volume operations. Investigations into platforms like Silk Road, Alphabet, and successors reveal sophisticated organizational structures with clear hierarchies, dispute resolution mechanisms, and security protocols, essentially replicating traditional gang logistics in a digital environment. Artificial intelligence is emerging as the next tool for criminal networks. Reports from cybersecurity firms indicate that gangs are experimenting with AI for fraud, phishing, and social engineering campaigns. AI algorithms can generate convincing fake identities, automate ransomware deployment, and optimize illicit marketing strategies. While evidence of large-scale AI-driven operations remains limited due to the novelty of the technology, law enforcement warns that these capabilities could soon become a game-changer. AI enables criminal networks to scale operations efficiently, evade detection, and exploit vulnerabilities with precision previously impossible in physical world operations. Human trafficking and smuggling have also adapted to digital platforms. According to Anodk reports, traffickers now use encrypted messaging apps, social media, and virtual private networks (VPNs) to recruit victims, coordinate transport, and collect payment. These methods reduce the need for physical intermediaries, minimize risk of exposure, and expand operational reach. The combination of traditional criminal control and digital infrastructure allows traffickers to operate across multiple countries while maintaining control over victims remotely, exemplifying the intersection of human exploitation with technological innovation. The globalization of criminal networks continues to expand alongside digital innovation. Modern gangs operate transnationally with greater ease than their historical counterparts. Intelligence from Interpol, Europol, and the FBI documents extensive coordination between street-level groups, prison-based leadership, and international cybercrime cells. Networks share operational knowledge, secure supply chains, and exploit systemic vulnerabilities in banking, logistics, and government oversight. This level of coordination mirrors multinational corporations, with roles, reporting structures, and enforcement mechanisms adapted to maintain efficiency and loyalty across dispersed operations. Despite technological sophistication, digital underground networks retain core traits from traditional gangs: hierarchy, discipline, and control. Leadership often resides with experienced members who maintain influence over decentralized cells. Compliance is enforced through surveillance, reputation systems, and occasionally physical intimidation. According to DEA reports, even purely digital gangs maintain enforcement protocols to ensure adherence to rules, prevent betrayal, and protect operational security. These parallels highlight the continuity between historical criminal structures and modern digital adaptations. The medium changes, but the principles of control, loyalty, and hierarchy remain central. Financial operations in the digital era also illustrate this evolution. Modern gangs exploit cryptocurrencies, online banking, and virtual assets while integrating these with traditional revenue streams like drug trafficking and human smuggling. According to FATF and U.S. Treasury reports, laundering schemes are increasingly automated, using AI, blockchain mixers, and anonymous exchanges. Criminal enterprises optimize these processes to reduce traceability and increase resilience against law enforcement disruption. The sophistication and adaptability of these strategies underscore the enduring innovation capacity of organized crime. The social dimension of digital gangs is equally significant. Just as historical gangs recruited youth through neighborhood influence, modern organizations leverage online platforms to identify vulnerable populations. Encrypted messaging, social media, and gaming platforms become recruitment grounds, particularly in regions with limited economic opportunity. Psychologists and sociologists note that the psychological mechanisms of loyalty, identity formation, and peer reinforcement remain consistent, even in virtual environments. The digital world merely provides new channels for influence, amplification, and control. Law enforcement faces unprecedented challenges confronting these digitally enabled networks. Investigative and intelligence agencies must contend with anonymization technologies, cross-jurisdictional operations, and the rapid evolution of tools like AI and cryptocurrency. Joint task forces, international cooperation, and advanced cyberforensics have become essential, yet criminal networks often remain one step ahead. According to Europol, the speed of adaptation in digital crime networks far exceeds that of conventional policing, creating a persistent operational gap. The rise of digital gangs also suggests an ideological evolution. Historically, territorial control and violence defined criminal identity. Today, control extends to information, data, and economic systems. Knowledge becomes as valuable as force, and digital infrastructure provides both offensive and defensive capabilities. Criminal enterprises can manipulate markets, extract data, and disrupt critical systems, achieving influence far beyond traditional street-level operations. In conclusion, the future of underground power is no longer limited to physical spaces, violence, or drugs. Criminal organizations are evolving into digitally enabled, globally networked entities, capable of exploiting AI, darknet platforms, cryptocurrency, and cross-border logistics. The principles of hierarchy, loyalty, and operational discipline persist, but the operational domain has shifted from streets and prisons to code, networks, and virtual currencies. Understanding this evolution is essential for law enforcement, policymakers, and society at large. The next generation of organized crime will be less visible, harder to trace, and highly adaptive. Efforts to combat it must integrate cyber intelligence, financial forensics, and social intervention strategies, recognizing that influence now travels at the speed of information, not just foot traffic or contraband. The underground is no longer defined by color, tattoos, or territory. It is defined by code, algorithms, and encrypted network. And in this new era, the most powerful gangs may never meet face to face, yet their influence will reach every corner of the globe. The fight against organized crime is evolving, and the battlefield has moved from alleys, prisons, and streets to the invisible networks of the digital age.